I've seen a lot of disturbing things in my former career, but the one that still visits with me every now and then is this. It was an inner city neighborhood with narrow streets and there was parking on both sides. A mother and her 6-year-old son were sitting on the stoop as the father pulls up and parks across the street. The son sees his father and takes off running to him. He runs between two parked cars. A lady that was coming down the street didn't even have an opportunity to see the little boy. Children always stick with you, but add both parents witnessing his death along with the innocent lady who just killed a precious 6-year-old boy. There wasn't even a chance for hope to get the child to the ER for some kind of miracle. I've had dreams where I'm there, moments before the accident, and I tell the mother to grab his hand. Or I'm the one on the stoop with the little boy instead of his mother. Or any variation, except I have never been driving the car in any of my dreams. I wanted to tell this story because there's a lesson to be learned from it. I luckily didn't respond to this one, but my training officer did. There was a husband and a wife at home. They were cooking. The wife accidentally dumps boiled water all over her lap. So her husband understandably panics. He puts her into his truck and he goes flying to the hospital. He's driving about 80 in a 50 and it's late at night. So as he's cresting a small hill, his truck leaves the pavement ever so slightly, so he swerved and he couldn't brake. He then slammed into the back of a dump truck that was attempting to make a turn. His wife died instantly. Her head was caved in by the corner of the dump truck's bumper. I had the pleasure of seeing the wreckage of the truck every day in our impound yard as we investigated the incident. The husband was charged with manslaughter. I don't know whatever happened with that, but add that on top of him already dealing with the death of his wife. He was wrecked. The moral of the story is, never attempt to drive someone like that unless it is imminent life or death. Call an ambulance. First responders are trained to drive at a high rate of speed, and they can also stabilize the patient. My brother is a retired law enforcement officer. About 10 years ago, he was driving home from the airport with his family and got passed by about 8 to 10 bikes doing over 100 miles per hour. He said that they passed him like he was sitting still and he was already going 70. So about 2 miles down the road, he went over a rise in the road with a slow turn and he saw all of the bikes pulled over and the riders were all walking around and freaking out. So he sensed, something was wrong, so he pulls over and got out to see what happened. When he walked up, he saw that one of the bikes had crashed and the rider had slid off the side of the road at a really high speed for like 50 feet and he hit one of the L-beams that supported a guardrail. He was cut in half, just above the waist. The bikers were all throwing up and had said that he was trying to do some type of trick at a high speed and it looked like he hit something and lost control. My brother was really shaken up. He called the police and told them to bring an ambulance with a body bag and that they didn't need to hurry because that guy was definitely dead. This isn't my story, but it's from a coworker of mine who now works at another department. He was dispatched to a call where a man was high on PCP and he was at his mother's house. His family was worried about him, so when the cop arrived, he said it was the bloodiest scene that he had ever seen. There was blood all over the floor, on the walls, and on the ceiling. When he walked all the way into the room, he saw a naked man just sitting on the floor, flossing his teeth. The guy was flossing his teeth with piano wire, and it ended up destroying the guy's teeth and gums. I've been a cop for a while now, and this is one of the calls that still haunts me. Okay, so I get a call for a domestic assault that had just occurred, and I learn that the victim is at the neighbor's house. So I get there, and I find the female victim's throat had been cut from ear to ear. The neighbor is holding a towel up to her throat, and the victim is struggling to breathe. So the paramedics are on their way, and I take over holding the towel. I'm trying to apply enough pressure to reduce the bleeding, but not so much pressure that I'm strangling her. Okay, so you know that there are laws against hearsay, right? Okay, basically, I can't testify in court about the events that someone else told me about and that I didn't personally witness. The person who actually witnessed it would have to testify to it. So one of the exceptions is what's known as the dying declaration. If someone is on their deathbed and believes that they are about to die, their statements are exempt from the hearsay rules. I had some serious doubts that this woman was going to live, so I wanted to ask her who did this to her. So in order for it to qualify as a dying declaration, I needed to be able to testify that she believed that she was about to die, so I asked her these 2 questions. The first question was, who cut your throat? Which she answered. The second question was, you realize that you may be about to die? And she answered yes. Our eyes were locked, and I still remember the emptiness in her eyes. Within a few minutes, the medic showed up, and my partner and I went next door to look for the suspect. The door was ajar, and we could hear a baby screaming upstairs. So we go in with our guns drawn, and the metallic smell of blood is overpowering. We made our way upstairs past smeared bloody handprints on the wall, and we found the child upstairs. He was unharmed. The suspect was long gone, but thanks to the excellent performance of the medical staff, the victim survived. I met with her a couple weeks later, and I was very apprehensive to speak with her again. I had basically looked at her and told her that she was going to die. When she opened the door, I could tell that she didn't recognize me. She had very little memory of what happened after she was assaulted. I told her who I was, and she hugged me, crying, and she thanked me for saving her life. The suspect ended up pleading guilty, so I never even had to testify as to what I had told that victim that night. It still haunts me to this day. I'm answering this for my son-in-law. He was a 911 dispatch coordinator. He received a call in the middle of the summer. A father had purchased a commercial zero-turn lawnmower to mow and maintain a large area. He started at the far side of the lot and was working his way toward the house. His 5-year-old daughter ran to him through the high weeds. He never saw her. He turned at the end of the lot and knocked her down and ran over her. The young father and mother never recovered. I haven't seen many horrific accidents, but the one call that stuck with me was my first and only road traffic collision. I'm a volunteer first responder, but at a top level, so I carry drugs, but am by no means a paramedic. But anyway, I got a call about a motorcycle versus a car coming off a roundabout. The motorcycle had 2 riders, and there was 1 driver in the car. The bike had come around the turn too quickly, and it clipped the car at such a high rate of speed that it had sent the motorcycle driver flying 150 yards down the road, with him being spread at various points across it. When I arrived on scene, there was a person helplessly doing CPR on what little remained of this poor person. I think they were just doing it out of shock more than anything. Somehow his right arm ended up in the passenger seat of the car. The driver of the car didn't sustain many injuries, although he turned out to be a hemophiliac, so he wouldn't stop bleeding from the little wounds that he did have. The female passenger on the bike had been ejected sideways over the car and landed face down in a ditch. As I went over, I could hear her screaming, and you could visibly see that about 70% of her bones had been broken, and they were pointing in different directions. So this meant that we couldn't get an IV in for pain relief anywhere. We eventually managed to turn her over, and this put her in a lot of pain. Then we see that she has a laceration right across her stomach, and everything was coming out. My job was to hold it all in with my hands while she begged for the pain to stop. The driver of the car walked away fine, and miraculously, after 4 weeks in intensive care, the girl survived. Unfortunately, she lost her leg and her fiancé. Drive carefully, because it doesn't take much to tear someone's world apart. I'm a TV news reporter that used to work in Arkansas. One day I got a call out to a house where a little girl had been chained to a dresser. When I arrived at the house, nobody was home, and the parents had already been arrested. So I started shooting video of the house when a quote-unquote friend of the family shows up. He invited us in, and everything looked normal. It wasn't a total dump, it was just a little dirty. But as soon as he opened the door to the bedroom, the overwhelming smell of urine hit me. There were dirty, nasty clothes piled in heaps, mixed with trash and random junk. There was a small space cleared right next to the dresser. Chain marks had rubbed the wood down the same way that you would expect to see from a chained up animal. The family friend said he understood why the parents had to chain her up. He said the little girl would sleepwalk and eat food when she wasn't supposed to. She was 5 years old, and it was by far the saddest thing that I've ever seen. She clearly had to use the bathroom where she would be chained up for days without food. So now you're probably thinking everything's good now, right? Wrong. Less than a year later, the little girl was killed by a neighbor. Her name was Jersey, and she was adorable. When I was still field training as a police officer, a call for a building alarm went out. So the call was to a historic 18th century plantation. And I had been to this place many times as a child for field trips, so I didn't really think anything of it. So we arrive, and it's myself, my training officer, and one other cop. So we hear the alarm going off, but the whole plantation is completely dark, so we can't really see much. The once harmless destination of many an elementary school field trip is now creepy as hell. A giant, empty 18th century mansion with several outbuildings nearby, all pitch black. There was a full moon, so that helped us out a little bit, but mainly it just contributed to the creepiness factor by adding a ghostly, soft glow to the dark world around us. So we start walking around trying to figure out what the deal is, because the place is huge. It's on 90+ acres. The mansion had secret passages, big open fields, slaves, the works. More than likely, some bad things went down here. As we're trying to figure out what to do, we find out from dispatch the alarm is coming from the slave quarters. My fellow officers are confused, and the new instructions aren't helping much. But luckily for me, in all of those field trips, I vaguely knew where the slave quarters were. In addition to being the new guy, this also meant that I had to lead the way. Then the alarm just stops. As annoying as it was, the now silent plantation was much less creepy without the alarm blaring in the background. Now it was just us, the plantation, and whatever awaited us in the moonlight. To get to the slave quarters, you have to go through this little narrow path through the freaking woods. So there we are, 3 grown men, brave and mighty police officers with guns at the ready, and you can just feel how creeped out we are. So we get to the slave quarters, and it's a tiny 2-story white hut. I'm 6 feet tall, and I had to duck down to fit into the doorway. I don't remember the number, but men, women, and children were apparently packed in this building, which was where they were supposed to live. The building had a 2nd floor, which was accessed by a tiny rickety ladder that led up to a mouse hole of an opening. Unfortunately for my training officer, he was the shortest and the smallest of the bunch, and after seeing the tiny crappy ladder that went up into the unknown abyss, we made him go up and check using the "we don't want to break the ladder" excuse. So again, unfortunately for my training officer, our logic was sound. He carefully climbed the ladder, 1 step at a time. The ladder creaked under his weight. So myself and the other officer, we just stood there with our flashlights locked onto him, just waiting for something to happen. So after what felt like hours, he gets to where he can pop his head and his flashlight upstairs. So he looks for probably about a millisecond and says, "We're good," and shuffles back down the ladder. So we get the hell out of the slave quarters and we start circling back to our cruisers. There's a huge field between the mansion and the nearby river, which we decided to go through to get back. The moon was nice and bright, so to hell with going back through those woods. So we start crossing the field, and there, in the distance, in the middle of the field, is a person, just standing there. I've never been the "I believe in ghosts" type of person, but I've never been the "I don't believe in ghosts" type of person either. So with our guns out, we start walking towards the person. A paraphrased version of the whispered conversation we had as we walked was, "Is that a person? No way. I think it is. Are you sure? Damn, man, I think that is a person." So we get closer and our guns start raising higher and higher. The person is just standing there. They're not moving. The moon is still casting its ominous glow on everything around us. I don't know which one of us did it first, but someone shouted, "Police, let me see your hands." Nothing. The guy is perfectly still. So we all start shouting various commands in our best tough cop voices. Unless this person is deaf, there is no way they cannot hear us. I swear, as we're closing the distance, the more we're all feeling like this is a ghost of some sort. This person was standing a pretty good ways away when we first saw him and started walking towards him. He hadn't moved an inch. He didn't turn around to look at us or anything. He was perfectly still. We've probably been walking towards him for like 5 to 10 minutes at this point, still gripping our pistols and shouting commands. So finally we get right up on it. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't even something you could easily confuse for a person like a scarecrow. It was just some kind of post or something. No one said a word. We just sighed, holstered up, and got the hell out of that place. At the time, even to this day, I don't think I have ever been that creeped out. I'm sure the fact that each of us could tell that the other guys with us were just as freaked out, that added to the creepiness of it. We never spoke a word about it afterward. When I was in the 12th grade, I met a girl who was a paramedic, and I made the mistake of asking her if she remembers her first call. In Ontario, paramedics typically take turns driving and being in the back with the patient, so this was her first time being the medic in charge. This is what she told me. I remember being excited, waiting for my first call to come, and then as we just sit down for dinner, the alarm goes off. Dispatch had reported an incident involving a train, but the details were unclear, so we didn't really know what we were going into. It turned out there was a 15-year-old girl who had autism and was obsessed with trains. Her father's house was very close to the train tracks, and nobody was looking when she wandered off. She wandered off because she heard a train horn. She was struck by the train, and when I got there, she was found laying in the ditch next to the tracks with her intestines hanging out of her stomach. We called a code 5, which is an obvious death, and after being cleared from the scene, we returned back to base. Neither one of us ate that night.